I've made this point before that the moment you have a child, your favorite athlete is no longer LeBron James or Serena Williams, Leo Messi, or Bryce Harper. It's the athlete down the hallway. That's who you invest in emotionally and financially. Your own child athlete is whose playing time you most monitor closely, whose treatment by refs bothers you the most, who you trade stories about with friends at backyard barbecues. This generally comes from a good place. You love your kid and you want them to succeed, or at least not be eliminated, culled from the herd. You want that more than anything else in the world, really. We're talking about the stuff of DNA evolutionary code. If you can afford the arms race that has become youth sports, it's hard not to go with it. Even our next speaker, one of our society's great thinkers, felt the tug. Wikipedia describes Michael Lewis as an American author and financial journalist. Full stop. No mention of sports. We know better. His books and movies have been among the most influential in sports. He wrote The Blind Side on the evolution of modern football and the class dimensions in the college game, and Moneyball, which called BS on a century's worth of collective wisdom by baseball insiders and helped usher in the era of statistical analysis. Michael is my kind of writer. He takes complex topics that have reshaped key American institutions or American life itself and unpacks them, makes them understandable to a wide audience through vivid storytelling and characters. In his latest project, he's the central character. His topic mines the same ground as Project Play, youth sports. It's called Playing to Win, an audiobook released this week on Amazon Audible that explores the psyche and social impact of the travel team parent, a force that has transformed sports at all levels and the lives of families everywhere. Here's how he opens up the 2-hour audiobook.
Last summer, my wife sent me a text message. She just dropped off our child at some softball field in Oregon and gone looking for a gluten-free meal in a gluten-filled mall when she experienced what must have been a terrible moment of clarity. She saw what kids' sports had done to our lives. "This is hell on earth," said the text. "There is no reason for me to be here doing this." And with that, she was done. Right up to that moment, as a mother, she'd been willing to do pretty much whatever it took. No drum lesson was too much trouble to reschedule. No playdate too distant to drive to. No homework assignment trivial enough to ignore. But this, well, it was all finally too much. If I wanted our child to continue her athletic career, I'd have to manage it on my own. A part of me was surprised that it had taken so long for her to break. 1,610 girls' softball games. I counted them up. In the beginning, a decade ago, before either of us had any real idea where our children's athletic careers would lead us, most of their games were fairly sweet-natured affairs played no more than an hour's drive from our home in Northern California. In time, they became a lot less sweet and a lot more distant. In just that past year, our 16-year-old daughter had played softball in Portland, Denver, Las Vegas, Orlando, Boston, Yaphank, New York, Middletown, Connecticut, Princeton, New Jersey, and 2 small college towns in western Massachusetts. She'd spent 27 nights in hotel rooms in Irvine, California, and become an A-list member of Southwest Airlines. If all you knew about her was her itinerary, you might guess that she was an overworked salesperson for a mid-sized American company based on the West Coast, but a company with peculiar national ambitions. 1,610 softball games sounds excessive, but it really doesn't capture the enormity of the experience from my wife's point of view. You'd need to include another 2,000 team practices, plus another 1,000 or so private batting practices, pitching lessons, and weight training sessions. A home movie scrolls through my wife's brain of the life we might have had it not been for sports. In this movie, our family is more like an American family from the 1950s. We spend weekends together. We're able to use the tickets she bought 4 months in advance to go see Daniel Handler reading Lemony Snicket, instead of giving them away and flying to a softball field in the Denver suburbs. We're allowed to vacation at times other than the few weeks in August between the summer and fall softball seasons. And we'd devote not so much as a passing thought to which Hampton Inns offer a cold breakfast before 6 in the morning on Sundays. I just assumed as a family that we'd have dinner together, she says, as this movie sadly rolls along. We can't even pull that off once a week. Walker still doesn't know how to use a fork. Walker is our 12-year-old son. I completely understand why my wife now feels as she does, and even if I didn't, she's earned the right to feel however she feels. But I have my own feelings about the situation. One night, not long after she returns from the softball fields in Oregon, I tell her that the time has come for me to sit down and try to make sense of them, to examine this strange new force at the center of American culture that has not only reshaped millions of families, but changed the way fathers view their daughters and those daughters view themselves. She just looks at me with suspicion. Don't sugarcoat it, she says.
Irvine, California is where I met up with Michael in the spring, in the very last tournament for his daughter Dixie before she moved on to college softball at a top D3 school. He had reached out to me as part of his research. Counting practices and private lessons, the game that day was more like Dixie's 3,600th exposure to the game. That's as many days as she had lived since first grade.
It was excessive. And the reason I got in touch with you was, I was groping, I didn't realize that anybody had grappled with the subject until and someone pointed me your way. But then the subject was just how different the experience my daughter was having and my son is having playing basketball than I had when I was growing up as a kid with sports, and just how extreme and excessive it had all gotten. And I just thought, while I was wrapping this up, I had two thoughts actually. One was, I'm going to get some of my money back by writing about this, and the other was, I really want to document it because I think it's an aspect of American life that consumes some large number of American families, and nobody really ever talks about it. They talk about it with each other if they bump into each other, if they happen to be in the same sport and that sort of thing. But while CNN and MSNBC and Fox is nattering on all the time, 24/7 about federal politics, actual Americans are obsessing about their kids' lacrosse career. And that's what interested me. That's what kind of got me thinking I ought to write this. I had to write this up to kind of figure out what's going on here.
And what did you learn? What was the core of that obsession?
All right. Well, let's start with this. It's the way we kind of slid into it. Like, I live in Berkeley, and this environment is a kind of a collaborative, non-competitive sports environment. The sports leagues are not designed to create college athletes. And I happen to have a child who is talented, and she found her way into the world where you are competing with other kids for the attention of college coaches. And the minute we hit that world, the experience became a mixed blessing. There are really good things about it. There are things I really quite enjoyed. I mean, as grueling as it sounds to spend, 20 weekends a year in a Hampton Inn in some godforsaken town in some remote part of America, you're with your child. And, the sort of enforced interaction with parents, which was fun. But the minute she hit the really competitive strain of softball, it ceased to feel like play. It ceased to feel, it was fun in the way that, professional sports are fun for the people that play it, but it was much more like a business. And what was, at the core of I think there are a couple things at the core of this obsession. It was obsession. It was obsessive for all the parents. It was obsessive for all the kids. Obsessive to the point where, teammates are kind of slightly hoping each other ill so they can get on the field. Obsessive to the point where, parents are angry and screaming at coaches and screaming at umpires, and, obsessive to the point where it just seemed like not entirely happy all the time. Um, the first answer to the question is everybody's competing for a scarce resource. And the scarce resource is a college scholarship, or less often spoken of, a slot at an elite college that you get to that you wouldn't get otherwise because you're an athlete. That's the explanation everybody gives. You talk to the parents, say, "Oh, we got to do this because, Betsy really wants to. She really needs a scholarship." But if you back away from that, it's a pretty thin excuse for what's going on, because the average scholarship in college softball is, I don't know what it is. It's like, I've forgotten, but say it's like $10,000 a year, something like that. The parents are forking out $20,000-$30,000 a year for their kids to compete, to even get to the point of getting the scholarship. They just took the money that they were spending on their kids' athletics career and put it in 529 plans. They would come out so far ahead than where they end up with a partial scholarship playing in college. The money argument was just, I found, was just a cover for what was really going on. And what I think was really going on was this odd sense that you could tick the box of I'm being a good parent by diving into this world, up to your eyeballs, and this sense that your job as a parent is to help your kid win a brutal red and tooth and claw competition.
If your kid's a good athlete, therefore means that you're a good parent.
Yeah, there's something like that's going on, and it starts. Especially it means you're a good dad. It's the dads are the ones who are heavily. It's always a dad whose career didn't quite work out. His athletic career isn't quite what he hoped, or a dad who just got. In my case, I think my case is a pretty typical case. A dad who's involved, but certainly not doing 50% of the parenting when daughter hits age 6. And there's this thing that I'm uniquely qualified to take 100% of the responsibility for. And my wife says, thank God there's something, go do it. And it becomes this slippery slope. It starts as, it's fun. It's daddy and daughter going off to the park once a week, or then twice a week. And then daddy's coaching the team, and then he's coaching 2 teams, and then he's running the league, and then he's on the board. And then he's coordinating all the travel softball teams in the area, and his kid's a superstar. And dad's entire identity starts to become wrapped up in how his kid's doing. That was me. I was spending at the peak for a period of 6-7 years. I was spending 30 hours a week as a softball coach, or they call me commissioner but as the organizer of our competitive travel teams here. And that's easily 30 hours a week. As much, I was supposed to be writing books, right? I was spending about as much time on my kids' athletic careers as I was on my own literary career. And you think, and I tell a story in the little piece you mentioned, where how crazy the story is it didn't occur to me there's anything strange about it until I mentioned it to someone else. I was off with Obama. I was writing a piece for Vanity Fair about the President of the United States. The President of the United States had flown me with him down to Cartagena, Colombia, and had spent a lot of time with me on Air Force One, time with me down there, was really helping me with the piece, and was kind of into it. And we land back. We actually landed for some reason not at Andrews Air Force Base, but at Dulles. I can't remember why. And as we're getting off the plane, he says, "You know what? Don't go home yet. Come get in the Beast. That's the limousine, and ride with me to the White House. Come check out the White House." And I said, I looked at my watch, and I said, I got a tournament. I got a softball tournament. I got to get back to supervise in California, and I got to get on a plane and get out of here. And he kind of smiled and said he understood. And I got on a plane. And I came back to supervise a 10-year-old girls softball tournament. And it was like 9 months later, I mentioned that, I really probably should have gone to the White House with Obama. It probably would have improved the piece. I got to know him better. They said, why didn't you? I said, well, because I had the softball tournament to come back to. You out of your mind? But I was doing that kind of thing. That's extreme, but that kind of thing routinely. Vanity
The only
Fair.
thing more powerful than the president of the United States
The
is
feeling,
what
it
you
was like,
feel for your daughter. And
the thing that was going on in my brain is I don't want to miss that. No way I'm going to miss that. She's going to be a star. She's going to, they're going to kick ass. It's going to be so much fun. I'm not going to miss that. And it becomes, my wife said for a period of time, she thought it had actually changed my brain chemicals. Now, what she was seeing was a version of me when I played sports. And it was joyous for me, but it got out of hand.
let's talk about the economy, the youth sports economy a little bit here. I mean, you went to the London School of Economics. You worked on Wall Street. You've written about, rigged economies, the housing bubble of 2008. You've studied behavioral finance. What do we need to know about the youth sports economy?
That at the bottom of it is the ignorance of the consumer, the ignorance and delusion of the consumer. The consumer is the parent of the child who is having to pay, sometimes 10, 20, 30, $40,000 a year to keep a kid in the travel softball or travel baseball or travel basketball world. The consumer, the parent, in this case me, typically only knows what they need to know to be intelligent in their decision making after they've gone through the experience. And they typically only go through the experience once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times if they have 3 kids who are gifted athletes. But this isn't a repeat thing. This isn't like going to a restaurant. You're not learning thing, or you are learning, but by the time you learn, it's kind of too late. So the ignorance of the consumer and the anxiety of the consumer is at the heart of the whole thing. The anxiety of the parent who's paying the money. My observations, one of the things that shocked me was just how willing people who had no resources were to hand over anything they had for the sake of their kids' athletic careers. I watch parents drive 8 hours to a softball tournament and sleep in a tent because they couldn't afford a Hampton Inn hotel. The people take out loans. People really bankrupt themselves for this thing. So that's at the bottom of this whole market. And you can almost look at it like a market for addictive drugs. The behavior of the consumer is a bit like that. Built on that foundation, this foundation of an endless supply of anxious parents willing to cough up whatever it takes to give their kid an edge in this hyper-competitive world, is a mix of toxic and benign characters and actors. They're really good coaches. They're really bad coaches. They're really horrible travel sports organizations. They're really good travel sports organizations. The ability of the consumer, the parent, to sift among them is very weak. When you're shopping for these organizations, there's just not a lot of good information. It's word of mouth, anecdote, a lot of unreliable stuff. So the market doesn't sort the good from the bad because the consumer doesn't sort the good from the bad. So there's nothing driving out the bad softball tournament organizer or the bad coach. And there's nothing like lifting the really great tournament organizer or the really great coach or the really great travel organization.
It's like there's a lack of like clear quality standards that a parent can say, well,
right.
Evaluating this organization, are your coaches trained in these key competencies? Do you have risk of, assessment insurance? Are you abiding the principles of the American development model? I mean, it's like parents don't even know where to start.
They don't even know where to start. And where they do start, they don't even start intelligently. Where they do start, let's just take softball, but I'm sure it's representative of all the sports, is they go on the website of the travel organization and they see the pictures of the little girls who have been committed to college, and they say, oh, look, they got a lot of girls into college. And they don't know, first, they don't tend not to evaluate the quality of the college the girl went to, and they have no ability to know whether that's better than what the girl would have done without the softball organization. Two, they don't know the financial terms of any of it. Like, did the girl get a scholarship? Did they, she a walk on? None of that stuff. And three, you never see all the girls who never get to a college at all. So you get really weak anecdotal information about about only one of the things you're paying attention to. And so when you're in a market with an ignorant consumer, you're in a market that's primed for chaos and primed for exploitation, and is inefficient. It's not the ignorance of the consumer means the market can't correct. And that's what it felt like to me. It's like the market can't correct. Now, if you could introduce information, like if there were rankings or ratings or some minister of sport who came along and said at least a seal of approval or not seal of approval, like a health inspector goes in and says it's okay to eat in this restaurant, you're not going to be poisoned. That would have a big effect. You'd at least have some information and a mechanism for at least driving out the more toxic actors. But let's just move on, because that's just the level of consumer buying the product of travel, organization, and coach. At the next stage, the travel organization has to negotiate its way into the tournaments that are most attended by college coaches. And that is a whole nother hairball. That you've got tournament organizers who lie about how many college coaches are going to be at their tournament, and nobody knows. You kind of, maybe they were there, maybe they weren't. You have tournament organizers who bribe college coaches to come to tournaments when the college coach has no interest in any of the kids there. They're just being paid to show up in their college stuff and seem like they are looking for athletes. You have tournaments where there are legitimate, college recruiting showcases, but they're actually 40 fields and only 2 of them are really where the college coaches are, and 38 of them are of no value whatsoever.
You want to be on the good fields.
The good fields. And there's no way for a parent to navigate this. So it's a market that's broken, is what it is. It's like it's a market for lemons. There's a famous George Akerlof paper called The Market for Lemons. It shows the way a market fails when there is asymmetry of information between buyer and seller. He was talking about the used car market, but there are a lot of markets like this. The subprime mortgage bond market was like this before the financial crisis. The difference is there's no obvious, because it's fueled by these emotions, these highly irrational emotions, the emotions of the parent for the child. It's a little hard to see how it self-corrects. Like the subprime mortgage market was eventually going to crash. Eventually someone was not going to pay off their mortgage and the things were going to be revealed as valueless. Eventually the used cars, used car is going to die on the highway, and word is going to get around that the used car dealer you got to be careful. It doesn't work that way with this. It's more resistant to the positive effects of market forces. And to your larger purpose, like, who's supervising this? Like, who says it's okay? Who says it's okay to force 25 softball teams from the Bay Area, from Northern California, to fly to Colorado to play each other and spend a fortune and bankrupt families? And you're like, why does that make sense? Or who says it's okay that you basically weed out all kinds of kids who should be playing because they can't afford to play? That it becomes an actually economic competition as much as an athletic competition. That your ability to pay means that you have access to this privileged relationship with college admissions offices, or this privileged relationship with college scholarship money. It's just the opposite of what it should be. It should be, sports should be a leveler. It should be a way for kids to come from nothing and emerge as, champions. They should It should be a way to identify kids who have ability to work hard, who have ability to succeed in tough environments, who have no resources, and get them into places with resources. But it's become the opposite. It's become essentially a regressive rather than a progressive enterprise. And that was the part that I liked least about it. And that was, I don't know about you, but was the part I maybe liked most about my own athletic career, was the way it threw me I grew up in New Orleans, out of privileged New Orleans, and threw me into all of New Orleans, and black and white and poor and rich and Catholic and Irish, and you were competing. Nobody cared who your daddy was, and that's, in the world of travel sports, that's gone. Because it may be true nobody cares who your daddy is once you're there, or your mama is, but to get there, it matters who your mama or daddy is, and that's just a shame.
How should we feel about that, or what should we do about it, or what
That's
can
a
we?
really good question. You have the answer to that. I don't, but that's called boomer asking. When you ask the question that the person should be asking you, so I should be asking you that question, but I'll take a little stab at it. The people who could do a lot are the college coaches. The college coaches could insist on seeing on the importance of high school sports, on seeing the places where the kids who don't have the resources can play. And they could do it at a local level, and I think some of them do. Heather Tarr, who coaches softball for the University of Washington, had a lovely conversation with her. Never ended up in the story, but she said that at her local level, she tries to do, for really little kids, kind of clinics to sort of identify kids who might not have resources, but might somehow get them into the pipeline. So college coaches could have an effect. If there were a ministry of sport, I mean, this is all crying out for regulation. It basically, I think, in an age that hates regulation and that doesn't really understand its value, doesn't understand that every market that really works is a market that's well regulated. And this is a market that doesn't particularly work very well. If the kid all of a sudden can't afford to play when they're 10, and that, they can't afford to travel to Colorado from California to play in the tournaments, by the time they're 12, they can't compete. So you got to start really young. But to sort of what we need to do is change the culture. So there is a sense that if you have a travel program and you've got 18 little girls on a team, that 4 or 5 of them really should be on scholarship. That there should be maybe we think of these things should be priced like airline seats, kind of your ability to pay. And but it's how I feel about it is outraged. I mean, it does feel like you're taking this thing that really has nothing to do with money, and there's so few places in our culture that have nothing to do with money, and sports really should have nothing to do with money, and turning it into something that has a lot to do with money. It's the last thing the society needs. It needs more things that have nothing to do with money, not fewer. That if you insist on the localness of it, and you force it, you sort of try to encourage it to be local for as long as possible, you solve a lot of the problems. Because expense comes when you hit the road. That's the expense. The big expense. That's when kids start getting weeded out, when they have to get on an airplane or go pay for a hotel room. So you insist on these, you invest in these local leagues. And if these local leagues are strong, they hold the kids into their 11, 12, 13. And at that point, when they're 13, you get them to 13. If you don't have any money and you can play, someone's going to see it. You're not going to be lost because you don't have the money. At that point, someone will pluck you out. But the problem is that what happens in a lot of communities is that the community's not that strong, and all of a sudden the kids are off at age 9 and 10, frequent flyers on Southwest Airlines, and that's a big problem.
Do you think that'll change at all? I mean, we have seen over the past few months hundreds of college programs get cut across the country. Just yesterday was Minnesota got rid of 3 or 4 programs. Iowa a week before that, Stanford cut 11 programs. Ivy League schools, D2, D3. I mean, it's been a bit of a bloodbath and a bit of a reset in college sports these days. So as that happens, and as programs, including softball programs, get cut, does that change the value proposition or the potential ROI that could motivate parents to get their kids on these early forming travel teams and spend all the money and spend all the time?
I'm sure it does. It certainly removes the official, it lessens the power of the official story, which is we're doing it for college scholarships. It doesn't remove some of the core emotional reasons why people are doing it in the first place. So I think that the world of youth sports is going to die a harder death than the world of college sports. I think you may find that some of these programs get cut back, and the first response in the youth sports market is nothing. They're going to go back to right to where they were until people figure out what all that meant. Also, it's a little hard to know what's temporary and what's permanent. This is a very odd period. It's a little hard to know what will be cut permanently and what won't be. But let's say that there is I can't remember what the numbers of dollars are for college scholarships, athletic scholarships, say $3 billion a year, just to pick a number. Let's say that's reduced by a third, or half. I don't think it will have an equivalent effect in the youth sports market, because I think the youth sports thing is there's something else going on there above and beyond this college scholarships dollars. And as long as there's any kind of story, as long as there are any dollars out there, you can still tell the story. We're doing it for the scholarship dollars. So unless they just eliminate, so let's take softball. Let's say they just eliminated college softball altogether. It didn't exist anymore. It's not going to happen because it actually makes money. It's like it's the women's sport that I think does well. It's on ESPN all the time. And but let's say they just eliminated it. It would deal a big blow to the youth sports stuff. It would not completely kill it, because there are people doing it for other reasons.
Michael, thank you for joining us.
Sure, total pleasure.